Welcome to Pandora's Box Chat Show. I'm your host Leila Benelli, and with me the beautiful Felicity guest.
Hello Leila. Good evening viewers. Thank you for joining us again this evening.
So Felicity, what are we talking about tonight?
Tonight we're talking about co-parenting, a very significant part of post-relationship in the best interest of the child to keep things stable for the children post-relationship. They've gone through a lot of change and trauma.
So as the word implies, co-parenting means both parents are parenting the children. But what does it actually mean in practicality?
Co-parenting means that both parents have an equal relationship with the child, as is the child's right to a relationship with both parents. So co-parenting is essentially coming to an agreement that works for both parents, but primarily for the child or children.
How do you go about get the buy-in from the father or the mother if the one party is not interested?
It's actually court mandated with co-parenting to pursue mediation as a solution to finding a workable agreement for both parents in the child's best interest.
What is the definition of co-parenting?
Co-parenting is essentially that you still parent the child jointly making important decisions, and that would be schooling, education, or schooling is education, health, major decisions concerning the child, that there's an agreement in place as to how to go about reaching those agreements and keeping the agreements.
Co-parenting certainly doesn't work for everybody. What is in your opinion, what is the magic solution to make co-parenting work?
I think that when both parents participate in the process of coming to an agreement, they both feel that they have contributed to the solution as opposed to it being imposed on you. If it's imposed on you, then you kind of feel that you've been robbed of participating in the process of coming to an agreeable solution for the children. So that is often what puts people on the defense. So to encourage people to be open and to actually be adults and set the example of communication, open communication.
So I'm sure many of our viewers out there are wondering, how can I get help in my particular situation? So we have a Pandora story today. Do you care to share?
So Pandora's story, their relationship came to an end when the child was really pretty young, 1 year old. It's very young, and it's a long time ahead for them to co-parent. So they set up a maintenance agreement before they set up the parenting plan. Then they agreed to go for mediation, and Zeus didn't arrive at the appointment. He then wanted to have it done through child welfare, which Pandora agreed to. When Pandora arrived at the set meeting, she realized that Zeus and the social worker had a very familiar relationship, and she thought, well, this is very strange that they're very relaxed. And then they started the mediation process, and the facilitator allowed him to read this very extensive story from a written form. And he didn't really address the needs of the child. He spoke about his feelings towards Pandora. And then he started getting quite aggressive about it. So Pandora asked the mediator to please take control of the situation, because she was starting to feel threatened. And she didn't. She left the mediation session. So where does this leave the child? There's no agreement in place. Up to this point, he actually had unrestricted access to the child.
So he actually had nothing to complain about, or there was no difficulty on his part to fight?
No, there wasn't. But it's obviously in everybody's best interest to get a court-ordered parenting plan in place, because then you have guidelines to operate, especially if one parent is not wanting to co-parent. what happened thereafter was Zeus went to court and he applied for primary care. And his affidavit was also once again, very extensive, and he accused the mom of being unfit, and which is very common, with unresolved conflict. And it eventually got to a hearing in the children's court, and the magistrate picked up a whole lot of indiscretions or things that concerned him, and he actually ordered Zeus to go for some psychological evaluation and restricted his access to twice a week only. So here they are, several appearances in court, and it's actually worse than what it's ever been, because he has to come to Pandora's house to have supervised access to the child, and he's intimidating, and so you can see it's all very complex and difficult, and nobody's situation is the same.
In this case of Pandora, it sounds very much like the mediator was on the side of the husband.
They were never married, but yes, on the side of the father, which is a premise for mediation, is that you are neutral and you're unbiased, because you're supposed to create a safe space where both parties feel supported and comfortable expressing themselves. So if one, as Zeus did, where he started attacking her personally, for Pandora to feel secure in this environment, the facilitator, mediator, should actually have taken control at that point.
Would you advise the Pandoras out there to consider co-parenting before anything else?
It's not even a consideration, it's a legal requirement.
Okay.
So
you don't have a choice. This is what you need to do. You need to co-parent. You can't, as a mom, decide, well, I'm going to just parent my child alone. Or as a dad, decide, well, actually, I'm just parenting my child alone. You can't do that.
No, you can't.
So if you decide to get divorced, and for me, I'm all about practicality, so let's spell it out. And to spell it out, if you decide to get divorced, what you are saying is that co-parenting is absolutely part of the law that comes with divorce. Is that what I'm understanding?
Exactly that. The child has rights. We have responsibilities. So in that, we have a responsibility to be the parent. And the child has a right to a relationship with both parents.
So in other words, the child's not getting divorced. You are.
Correct.
Okay. And I think it's a very powerful definition, something that I had to remind myself all the time when I'm upset with the dad and I'm like, I was like, I think most of us have felt to a certain extent. So we just want to do something that we might regret later on. But if we feel that things are not working too well for us and in our negotiations with our Zeus in our lives, we need to make sure that we keep all the time in our minds that this is not the child's battle. It's our battle.
Absolutely. It's not the child's battle. And as you said, the child is not the one getting divorced. Something that is very common that a lot of parents seem to forget is that maintenance and access are two completely separate issues. So if you are having a problem communicating with the other parent, you cannot withhold the child and you cannot withhold financial support towards the child. They're completely separate legal issues, and a lot of parents seem to use the financial aspect and access as a way of controlling or intimidating, and it's wrong, because the person that suffers is the child or the children.
And I mean, we spoke about it last week in terms of the financial abuse, which is that financial control, that last little bit of control that in most cases the men keep over the women. And I'm not saying it's not the other way around, but in most cases it's the man keeping that control over the woman by means of withholding finances or controlling the finances. So in terms of co-parenting, one would really need to get to the point where the discussion is around what's best for the kids, when can I see the children, when can you see the children, but not because you want to see the kids, because the kids need to see you. There's a big difference between me wanting to see my kids or being with my kids versus my children needing to see me on a regular basis. Probably that's where the parenting plan comes in. where there's a set schedule.
It protects the non-primary caregiver that if the other parent is trying to limit access to the child, then it's enforceable.
And with that, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Pandora's Box. We are now joined by Nina Menzing. Nina, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time tonight.
Pleasure.
Hello, Nina.
Hi. So, co-parenting, a big topic. So, what is the most common form of co-parenting that you see in your practice?
Obviously, being a mediator, I'm sometimes seeing the beginning of the beginning stages of when people are getting divorced and they're wanting to co-parent. They just don't know how to do it, so we'll set that in place. In the court mediations that I do, we get highly conflictual parents in there, and that is all types. That's people wanting to co-parent, but just they don't have the ability to. There's just the highly conflictual co-parenting. There's people that need a parallel parenting plan to be put into place for the child's sake.
Nina, what happens if one parent is not willing to go for mediation for co-parenting, just refuses point blank, even if it is court ordered?
If they're wanting to co-parent or if they're not interested?
If they're not interested, but they're wanting access. So they are ordered to go for mediation, yet they refuse to participate in the process of mediation. We often see that on the group, where one parent just refuses point blank to even turn up at the appointments.
Well, it eventually will land back in front of the magistrate at court, and the magistrate will make an order.
Okay, so then there is, if the parents cannot come to an agreement or one is obstructive, then there is remedy through law, so a magistrate in that case.
If they've tried to go through private mediation, then they end up at family advocate or court. Family advocate will obviously mediate. At our court mediations, we often get mediations that haven't been able to be resolved at family advocate. They then land up in court. But before the magistrate makes an order, they will then attempt court mediation first, because it is mandated in the Children's Act. And if that is not possible, then I'll send them back to the magistrate, and the magistrate then makes an order.
How do we encourage parents who have just started the process, that have just getting divorced or just separated or just ended relationships? What would you advise parents to, the attitude to have going into this process?
Two things. I would advise that one really needs to try mediation before any type of litigation, and there has been more than enough research worldwide to show that mediation has huge benefits for the children long term and huge benefits towards the co-parenting relationship long term. And the second thing is that, and people hate this, and I'm sorry to say this, because they think if we say this, there's something wrong with them, but there isn't anything wrong with you. It's just, it's an insanely hectic process. Please go for individual counselling, both parties, because if both parties go for individual counselling or support, when they then come into the space of mediation or court process or sitting together working with the children, that's not brought into the space. The focus then is on what's best for the child and not on the emotional attachment between the parents.
So in the case of a Muslim couple, if they decide, if there's a divorce and they decide we're going to co-parent, what would be the steps that they need to take?
Well, if not if they're going to co-parent. If they get divorced and there's children involved, they really should get a parenting plan in place.
So a parenting plan is step one.
Step one.
And they would get
not
that
whether they're going to co-parent or not. It's clearly, if they've been divorced, they've been living in the same house with the children. What are they going to do now with those children?
Yeah.
Where are the children going to live? Who's going to pick the children up when, from which school? Who's going to take them on to the dentist? Who's going to... What afternoon activities are they going to do?
It's kind of automatically assumed that the mom is doing all of that. In most cases, I find, certainly in my case, that mom is just doing all of that and dad will be the weekend dad. Not anymore, or is it
not at all.
is that a traditional way of thinking?
Very traditional. It drives me absolutely crazy when people walk into my mediation and assume that the father's going to have a Wednesday night and every second weekend. That is so 70s. I'm sorry, but we're 2019. There's no standard. There's no parenting plan that I've ever done that looks the same as the one before. Everyone is completely case dependent based on the age and stage of the child, where the parents are living, how far apart they're living from each other, which schools the kids are going to, not many people are working 9 to 5 anymore either. People work on weekends, some have night shifts, some are...
So you
need to work with that family system, not just this is what you get, a Wednesday and a Saturday.
Yeah. So in the case where maybe they are not on good terms, they don't have the best relationship, but they could find their way to sit down with you, even if they don't speak to each other.
No,
is that something also that's possible?
Absolutely, yeah.
And is there a court ruling that can force them to sit down?
Yes.
And have that decision made? It is.
Court can mandate mediation. They can mandate mediation outside of the court process, or they can do court mediation. And then also in most divorce decrees, especially in the Western Cape, so I'm talking quite Western Cape here, is that most divorce decrees have clauses in there that if there's disputes further on, they have to either go for mediation or facilitation. Facilitation is a whole nother discussion before they even try litigation or going back to court if there's conflict later on.
And so I've heard that in certain cases children have a choice. Where does the child's choice come into the co-parenting plan or the parenting plan?
That's quite a big discussion. That's age and stage dependent on the child, and that's also how it's going to be done. So if the parents are absolutely not in agreement, the child needs to go through a full assessment, and then the social worker report or the child psychologist report will come back into the mediation. And the mediator will then sit there with that report and remind the parents as to what the child has said.
I notice far more men coming forward and going, I want to be more involved and have more access or more parenting time with our children. Do you notice a change in that?
I've noticed a change in demanding rights. And when somebody's demanding rights and threatening, that's going to escalate the conflict. So it's the way it's done. And again, it's what happens right in the beginning of the process. It makes a very big difference. If the initial process, if we're talking divorce, is initially litigated, etc., there's going to be problems after that, and research has shown that. If the initial divorce was mediated and both parents had a say in how they want to manage the family system from there on, there's far less likelihood of litigation later on. And then obviously if the parents were never married and there isn't that divorce process, but they split up and they've got the children to look after and there's nothing in place, the likelihood that conflict is going to come up is huge. Because there's no scaffolding, there's no base to work from, which would be the parenting plan.
It's complex. Whichever way we look at it, it's so complex. And I think this show, Pandora's Box, is, it's all of this where we can uncover all of these difficulties and complexities, and we will do so with episodes as we go along. I mean, we can look at the blended family, for example. I mean, that's a whole different story again, because if there's a stepmom or a stepdad, or maybe a stepmom and a stepdad, and there are other siblings now, step-siblings, it makes it really difficult, because how do you co-parent, and now there's another child that's not yours, and you have to consider that child's schedule. And I mean, our children today have crazy schedules. It's rugby, it's cricket, it's drama, it's 110 things. So to juggle all of that, not just logistically, but also financially, it is quite a nightmare. For me, I certainly found is mutual respect and consideration probably goes the furthest to ensuring a smooth sailing parenting. Unfortunately, we don't have both parties always seeing it the same way.
Can I just interject there and say that, as I know this is going to be triggering to some members, because here we are advocating co-parenting, and yet there are some very, very real valid cases where there is safety concerns, there is addiction, there is mental disorders, there's abuse, and here we are saying co-parenting must work for everybody. It doesn't always, and we need to be respectful of that and ensure the child's safety in those cases. but it's not for us to diagnose.
So what I hear
needs to be a full, proper assessment.
By who? Who would do that assessment? A psychologist or a lawyer? Or
depends on what the
circumstances
are. And just to be realistic about those situations in those cases.
So in the event or in the case where, I mean, we're talking in the case where both parties are compass mentors and there's no addictions and all of that, then co-parenting is by far the best, or it's assumed that this is where we're going to go, right? It's assumed that we will co-parent.
But what are you meaning by co-parenting?
That both parents are going to be involved in the children's lives without restriction.
I think we idealistically, I mean, that's just like you, that this is what is going to happen. And then life happens. Mm-hmm. And then things change. And suddenly we are not where we thought we were going to be in co-parenting or communicating post-relationship. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Nina, because I think we often forget about a lot of people end relationships, end marriages, because there are all kinds of abuse.
And another concern is that, and I get this a lot, is that there's the demand, the assumption that co-parenting means equal time. And then that becomes the demand, and that causes the conflict without the understanding that, I mean, I've literally had people arriving with an Excel spreadsheet down to the last 15 minutes of that child's life and how they're going to divide that. And then the one's fighting, yes, but during this 12 hours, the child's sleeping for 8 hours, so therefore I need more of this time of that day. You can't split a child.
So as we can hear, co-parenting is not a straightforward case ever. There are different scenarios that would determine different conditions and different parenting plans. Yeah. So every situation would determine what the parenting plan is going to look like in order for them to co-parent.
Absolutely, and that is why I think people really do need to have a mediator or third party helping them with that, because you can't just download a form off the internet and assume that that's going to work for your specific situation. And you're not going to, as the two parents who are so emotionally invested in the process, understand some of the nuances and some of the other things that might be needed, or some other questions that need to be asked in order to get to the best outcome.
So if you are struggling with setting up a parenting plan, all the details will be right here at the bottom. Also have a look at our Facebook page. We will leave lots of information there, website addresses where you can go and seek advice. I know FAMAC also has a lot of information on their website, so you can find all the answers that you need. It was wonderful having you with us, Nina. I know that we're seeing you next week again to talk to us about mediation.
Okay.
So if you want to know more about how to mediate to get to the point of having this parenting plan in place, then watch next week where we talk about mediation. Remember to stay tuned for our competition. We have wonderful prizes to give away, so don't go anywhere. Within the next half an hour, we will announce the winner. So comment, like, subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and keep watching. We'll be announcing the winner shortly. Felicity, and that's it, a wrap for another episode. Look forward to doing this again next week.
Absolutely. And remember, #Pandora Talks. Thank you for tuning in tonight.
Thank you. Good night.